A tea. My sister's wedding. They gave me dry bread. Mom scoffed, "That's all you're worth." Sis snickered. Always pathetic. I grabbed the mic, time for a show. The screen lit. Faces drained. "Turn it off," my sister yelled. 200 guests silent. You know that gut-wrenching feeling when you're at a five-star wedding, dressed your best, and they hand you a single, dry piece of stale bread? Just a dry crust on a bare plate while everyone else feasts. That's what happened to me at my own sister's extravagant, glittering wedding. It wasn't just food, it was a clear message, a slap in the face. This is all you're worth to us. And in that moment, as my mother's sweet poison dripped into my ear and my glowing sister sneered, pathetic, I knew I had two choices: crumble and cry like they expected, or remind them, forcefully, exactly who they were dealing with. What I did next wasn't just a scene, it was an earthquake, and it changed everything. For as long as I could remember, my family had perfected the art of subtle erasure. Not with shouting or slammed doors. My mother, Evelyn, was far too concerned with decorum for that. No, their cruelty was refined, almost surgical in its precision. I was always the other daughter, the quiet shadow to Delaney's blinding spotlight. While Delaney preened for pageant photos, bathed in applause at ballet recitals, I was backstage, holding forgotten bouquets, an unacknowledged presence. Evelyn used to draw a stark line, a wound I carried for years. Delaney was born to shine. Iris, dear, you're more of a shadow. Necessary, perhaps, but best when quiet. Even on my 10th birthday, I waited, wide-eyed and hopeful, in a little park my party had askew, for a party that never materialized. Evelyn had simply forgotten, taking Delaney to a critical modeling audition across town. My high school graduation was a bitter déjà vu. My parents chose Delaney's magazine photo shoot over celebrating my milestone, claiming, with a thin smile, "We thought your graduation was tomorrow." It was a pattern of casual, heartbreaking dismissal, a constant whisper that I was simply not enough, not important enough, to truly exist in their perfect world. So when the wedding invitation arrived, a thick, gilded envelope addressed not to "Dear Sister," but to a formal, distant Ms. Iris Whitmore, devoid of any personal note, I wrestled with whether to even attend. The Langstons, Jasper's family, were old Boston money, generations of polished teeth and silent power. The Baystone Grand, where the ceremony and reception would be held, was practically a shrine for Boston's elite, every marble tile screaming legacy. Of course, it would be there. My mother's call, just days after the invitation, wasn't to share joy but to issue a warning. Try to dress appropriately this time, Iris. It's a formal wedding, not a gallery opening. Don't embarrass us. I held my tongue, biting back the retort about how I'd only worn denim once, after a 10-hour train ride to make it for a forgotten Christmas dinner. Later, Delaney's text arrived, breezy and self-serving. "Hey sis, so excited you're coming. Quick favor, would you mind snapping a few pics during the reception? Nothing fancy, just candid moments, and free, of course, haha." That laugh, that casual expectation of free labor, twisted the knife. I replied, politely but with a newfound firmness, "I appreciate the thought, but I'd like to attend as a guest this time." She never bothered to respond. But then, the universe seemed to offer a different kind of invitation. The Clarion Gallery, one of the most prestigious art spaces in the city, called. They'd selected my series, portraits of solitude, intimate, raw depictions of people caught in quiet reflection, for their spring showcase. Sylvia Renner herself, a titan in the art world, had chosen my work, saying my eye was unflinching. I remember the exact moment, standing in my small studio, the setting sun painting amber streaks across my walls, my heart absolutely soaring. This was not a favor, this was recognition of my craft, my vision. I called my mother, shaking with a mix of excitement and a foolish, lingering hope for her approval. "Hi, Mom," I said, barely able to contain my voice. "I just got accepted into Clarion's spring show." Sylvia Renner chose my work. There was a pause, a silence long enough to leave a bruise. Then, Evelyn, smooth and clipped. "That's nice, Iris. Listen, I'm in the middle of finalizing some seating plans for the wedding. Can we talk later? The line went dead. No congratulations, no warmth, just dismissal. That call, that icy indifference, was the final straw. The wedding wasn't just a social event anymore. It was a stage for their carefully constructed narrative, and I was perpetually cast as the unwanted extra. The dry bread was just another prop. The wedding day dawned crisp and cold. I arrived in my emerald green dress, modest yet elegant, its clean lines a quiet defiance against their opulent display. The bay stone grand gleamed, its towering facade flanked by white columns and gold-trimmed doors. Inside, the lobby was a symphony of wealth, men in tuxedos, women in designer heels clicking on marble, conversations crisp with polite laughter. A young attendant, clipboard in hand, approached me with a practiced smile. "Miss Whitmore, welcome. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your table." I nodded, my heels soft against the carpeted hall. I wasn't naive. I expected a table near the back. But when she led me down a narrow corridor, past the main ballroom doors and toward a far corner near the emergency exit, my stomach clenched. "Here you are," she said, gesturing to a small, round table set for one. My name card sat on a bare linen. No flowers, no candles, no crystal glasses like the ones shimmering from inside the main ballroom. And there, at the center of my setting, a single, lonely piece of dry bread. No butter, no garnish. Just a crust. I sat down slowly, adjusting my dress. It was then Evelyn appeared, gliding toward me like a silver swan, pearls gleaming against her satin dress. Her smile never quite touched her eyes. "Darling," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial syrup, "so glad you could make it. You look comfortable." She leaned in, lowering her voice just enough for her words to be inaudible to passers-by, but loud enough to pierce me. "I see you found your place. With your career and freelance photography, I imagine this meal is rather appropriate." Simple, humble. Her manicured hand gestured toward the bread as if presenting a delicacy. "This is what you're used to, isn't it?" My jaw tightened, but I kept my face impassive, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. She lingered a moment longer, then turned and walked away, her silk rustling, leaving me with the bitter taste of that bread. Minutes later, the music shifted, and Delaney appeared in her custom gown, a cascade of satin and hand-stitched lace. She was stunning, radiant, the picture of composed grace. The crowd inside erupted in polite applause. As she made her rounds, she eventually floated toward my table. "Hello, big sister," Delaney said, her lips curling into a delicate smile, the sweetness of someone offering condolences at a funeral. "You made it." "I did." Delaney glanced at the bread, then at the desolate table, then back at me. "Your dress. Charming. Very minimalist." There was a pregnant pause. "You know," she added, lowering her voice, "I always admired how you managed to make everything look so affordable. It's a gift. You make even the most ordinary things look cheaper." That was the line. That was the moment years of polite cruelty, of being diminished, of being told I was a shadow, crystallized into a burning clarity. My composure didn't break. Instead, I reached into my small handbag, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a small black USB stick. I didn't wave it like a flag of defiance, didn't hold it up as a threat. I simply placed it in my lap, my thumb resting lightly on its smooth, dark surface. Delaney's saccharine smile faltered, her eyes darting to the unassuming device, just for a fleeting second. "Well," she said, her voice tightening, "enjoy the evening." She turned and walked back into the ballroom, her train catching briefly on a gilded chair before snapping free. Left alone again, beside that cold, dry bread, I didn't touch it. I just looked towards the glittering ballroom lights and waited. Not for food, not for conversation, but for the moment when silence, my silence, would mean more than anything my family had ever spoken aloud. Because that USB held their truth. And soon, everyone would see it. See, 3 weeks earlier, at Delaney and Jasper's lavish engagement party, hosted in an elite rooftop lounge, I'd been there. My camera was slung at my side, my presence as a photographer for candid shots to make Mom happy, a thinly veiled excuse for me to remain invisible. I'd learned long ago that my lens gave me cover, my silence, a peculiar kind of power. Toward the end of the evening, after most guests had moved to the terrace to watch fireworks, I'd wandered back into the empty lounge to adjust my camera. That's when I saw Delaney, alone near the bar, her phone lit up, her expression drawn tight. I instinctively raised my camera, not to photograph, but to observe, to understand. She was typing quickly, then paused, read something, and a slow, private smile spread across her face. As she turned, just slightly, my lens caught a glimpse of her screen, just enough before it disappeared. Tonight, one last time, my bed, not Jasper's. It was jarring, intimate, reckless. Delaney slipped her phone into her clutch and headed for the private elevator. I hesitated only a moment before following, slowly, carefully, staying out of sight. I had no intention of confronting her, I just needed to know. I took the stairs, 2 floors down, exiting discreetly into the underground parking structure. Delaney's car, the silver coupe our father had bought her, sat alone at the far end. I waited in the shadows. Minutes later, a black SUV pulled in. The driver stepped out, Cole Maddox, one of Jasper's business contacts, charming and far too smooth. Delaney walked straight into his arms. There was no hesitation, no pretense. The kiss was slow, deep, familiar. Not the thrill of a new affair, but something older, something worn in. I lifted my camera, my hands acting before my mind caught up, switched to video mode, and pressed record. I didn't zoom. I didn't need to. It was enough to see. Enough to remember. They talked briefly. She laughed softly, brushing his lapel, and then they disappeared into the back seat of the coupe. I stopped recording, stood still for another minute, then walked away without looking back. I never showed anyone the footage. For days, I convinced myself it wasn't my place. Maybe Delaney had her reasons. Maybe it wasn't my job to ruin a wedding. I kept the clip on a backup drive, unnamed, buried beneath client work. Until today. Until I arrived at her wedding only to be seated like a stranger. Until my own mother dismissed me with a smile as if she hadn't raised me. Until my sister, wrapped in white lace and self-importance, insulted me to my face. Until the dry bread. Then, just days before, a chilling discovery. The day after the wedding rehearsal, I drove to my parents' pale blue Colonial, hoping to speak privately with my father. But as I entered, I heard voices drifting from the sunroom. My mother's name, then my own. I slowed my steps. Evelyn's voice, calm and clipped. Don't worry. I've already moved the house, the condo in Martha's Vineyard, and the legacy shares into your name. Reginald has no idea. Delaney's voice followed, you're sure? Because after the wedding, I want things in motion fast. We can't afford for him to start poking around. Evelyn's conviction. He won't. That man hasn't reviewed a financial document in 5 years. He still thinks our lawyer handles everything. A clink of porcelain. Then, quieter, but clear, this is for us, for the women of this family. You've done more for our future with this marriage than Iris could have done in a lifetime with her little gallery shows. I felt my fingers tighten around my bag strap. Delaney gave a low laugh. After I'm married, I'll be the one holding the pen, the accounts, the estate, the trust, everything. I'll make sure you're set, Mom. You can finally retire. No more pretending with Dad. No more coddling Iris. Let her stay in Brooklyn with her artistic life. Evelyn's chuckle was icy. She won't last long. She's always been a phase, not a future. I stood there, breath shallow, a dull throb building behind my temples. This wasn't just family cruelty. This was betrayal masked as legacy. Theft in a silk dress. I pulled out my phone, opened the recording app, and quietly hit record. My hand trembled slightly, not from rage, but from the brutal finality of it all. I heard Delaney pace. I don't even love Jasper. But this is what power looks like. A Langston marriage, Mom. I'll be able to walk into any boardroom in Boston and have the room. You taught me that. Align yourself with advantage. Leave feelings at the door. Exactly, Evelyn said, pride heavy in her voice. You learned well. And then Delaney, with a dry edge and iris? She's just background, like wallpaper. We keep her around so no one accuses us of being heartless. But after the wedding, I say we cut the polite act. I agree, Evelyn said smoothly. No more invitations, no more forced holidays. She'll fade, and we'll flourish. I blinked back the sting in my eyes. It wasn't jealousy. It was horrifying clarity. My mother and sister weren't merely thoughtless. They were architects of deceit. This wasn't just about Delaney's affair. This was about rewriting inheritance, silencing voices, erasing anyone who didn't serve their narrative. I watched the recording meter tick upward, 1 minute, 2, 3. Then I slowly backed away, retracing my steps. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the weight of the betrayal yet. That would come later. For now, I had a recording. And soon, they'd have an audience. The ballroom shimmered. The orchestra finished its gentle interlude. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above tables dressed in white silk. The air hung with that peculiar stillness just before formalities resumed. At the head table, Jasper stood, raising his glass, his father, Douglas Langston, beside him. Douglas, a man with a politician's voice and a banker's restraint, addressed the crowd with practiced ease. To family, he said, to the joining of two legacies. To the future of Jasper and Delaney. Applause, warm and practiced. Then, the MC returned to the microphone. Before we conclude the evening, we have one final toast. A special message from the bride's sister, Iris. A ripple of surprise. Delaney's smile faltered. Evelyn, 2 seats away, stiffened. I stood calmly, my emerald green dress, simple yet dignified, catching a soft glint beneath the ballroom lights. I held no glass, no notes. Walking toward the front with slow, deliberate steps, I turned to face the guests. I appreciate the opportunity, I began, my voice clear and even, but I won't be offering a toast tonight. A murmur swept through the room. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed. I'm not here to offer blessings or rehearse sentiment, I continued. I came with something else. Something more honest. Something overdue. I held up the small black USB drive between my fingers, then handed it to the technician near the stage. I'd like to share a video, I said simply. Please play it. The lights dimmed. The screen descended behind the head table. The room shifted from polite curiosity to restrained tension. I turned and stood to the side, my hands folded calmly in front of me. The first scene flickered to life. Delaney, in the shadows of the parking structure, her coat draped over her arm, her phone glowing. The message, blown up on the screen, legible in the sudden silence. Tonight, one last time, my bed, not Jasper's. Gasps scattered through the room. Then came the footage, grainy but clear, of Delaney and Cole Maddox stepping into the back seat of her car, arms wrapped, lips locked. Some guests turned away, others stared, frozen in disbelief. Jasper sat unmoving, his knuckles white against the tablecloth, his face a mask of shock. The scene shifted. This time, audio played. Evelyn's voice echoed through the speakers, precise and chilling. I've already moved the house, the vineyard property, and the shares into your name. Reginald has no idea. Delaney replied with a bitter chuckle. After the wedding, everything's mine. You can retire, Mom. I'll take it from here. From the shadows of the crowd, Reginald Harrison rose slowly, his eyes locked on the screen, a dawning horror in his face. The ballroom had gone completely, utterly silent. Delaney stood suddenly. Turn it off now. Her voice cracked in panic. That's private. This is doctored. This is slander. But the video played on. Evelyn's laughter joined Delaney's, the sound of greed disguised as maternal pride, a blueprint for betrayal, drawn out for all to see. Then, before the screen faded, a final voice echoed into the darkened ballroom. That's enough, said a familiar voice. But it wasn't from the speakers. All heads turned as Cole Maddox, dressed in a dark suit, stepped forward from the side entrance. Real, present, not a recording. He moved toward the front of the room with calm precision. Delaney's eyes widened in disbelief. Her complexion drained of all color. What are you doing here? She whispered. Cole ignored her. He turned to the guests, to Jasper, to the Langston family, to everyone watching. "I was invited to the engagement party," he said, his voice steady. "I didn't know I was part of a game. She said it was one last night, nothing more. But it became clear that I was just another tool. A man used to hurt another. I had a feeling she'd twist the story, so I recorded our conversations. I have everything. Every message, every plan." Delaney began to shake her head furiously. "He's lying. He's obsessed with me." Cole looked at her for the first time that evening. "Delaney, I loved you once, briefly. But what you did to your sister, your father, your fiancé. You deserve the truth, not a performance." The screen went black. The lights returned. The ballroom remained silent, and in that silence, the truth finally stood taller than the decorations, the wealth, or the reputation they'd all fought so desperately to maintain. Jasper Langston didn't move for a long moment. His fingers twitched slightly at his sides as the last echo of Cole Maddox's voice faded. The wedding ballroom stood utterly still, as though the ornate chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Delaney had stopped crying, though her face was stained with blackened mascara, and her body hunched, trying to hide from a world that had suddenly turned its back. Evelyn sat beside her, lips pressed into a bloodless line, eyes darting across the room like a cornered animal. And then Jasper stood. He didn't look at Delaney. He didn't look at the crowd. Instead, he reached slowly for his left hand and removed the platinum band he had placed on his finger not 2 hours ago. Holding it between his thumb and forefinger, he stared at it for a long, heavy moment. "I loved a lie in a white dress," he said quietly, his voice not raised, but ringing out across the ballroom like a final, devastating bell. He placed the ring down gently on the linen-covered table and turned to his parents. Douglas Langston and his wife Elizabeth had remained composed during the entire scandalous unfolding. But now the steel in Douglas's jaw had hardened. He stood beside his son, tall and grim, and turned his eyes toward Evelyn Whitmore. "This marriage," he said, his voice cold and precise, "was not just a personal union. It was a business alignment, one we considered sacred. But deceit is not a value we do business with." Evelyn opened her mouth to protest, but Douglas cut her off with a sharp glance. "As of this moment, the Langston Group withdraws from all pending and proposed partnerships with Whitmore Holdings. Effective immediately, any outstanding negotiations are null." The words hit harder than anything Iris had said or shown. Gasps broke from the lips of several guests who worked in finance or society circles. They knew what this meant. The Whitmore name would take a fall, not just socially, but financially and fast. Delaney collapsed into her chair, hands covering her face. Jasper, without another word, turned and walked away from the table, his mother following quietly, her hand on his shoulder. And then Evelyn broke. "This is your fault," she screamed, rising so quickly her chair tipped behind her. "You." She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me. "You orchestrated this circus. You ruined my daughter's wedding. You destroyed everything we built." But the crowd was no longer listening. Guests had begun to rise from their seats, collecting their purses, their coats, their dignity. Conversations murmured like wind in the trees, soft, swirling, but unmistakably moving in one direction. "She deserves better," one woman whispered as she passed me. "I had no idea Delaney was like that," a man muttered to his wife. No one looked at Evelyn. "Sit down," she barked at no one. "This isn't over. Do you know who we are? We are the Whitmores." Her voice cracked again, hoarse and shrill. No one answered. The orchestra had long stopped playing. The only sound was the rustle of dresses, the scrape of chairs, the slow, echoing footsteps of guests who had seen enough. I stood still, my hands calmly at my sides. My eyes focused on nothing in particular. The silence felt heavier now, not out of shame, but out of finality. I didn't feel victorious. I felt unburdened. From the far end of the room, near the now darkened video screen, Reginald Harrison remained seated. He hadn't spoken a word since the video played. His tie was loosened, his eyes unfocused. But as the guests emptied the ballroom and the Whitmore name collapsed beneath the weight of its secrets, he finally turned to look at Iris. Our eyes met. He didn't speak, didn't offer comfort, apology, or anger. Just a long, unreadable stare from a father who had just realized he'd built his family legacy on sand. And I, though I said nothing either, knew one thing clearly now. The fall had begun. The ballroom emptied out, leaving only the faint scent of white roses and spiced candle wax lingering in the air. Servers moved quietly through the ruins of what had once been a picture-perfect wedding, clearing half-finished glasses of champagne and untouched slices of cake. In the distance, Evelyn's voice had long since fallen into silence, either from exhaustion or disbelief. Delaney was nowhere to be seen. I remained near the stage, my green dress now slightly wrinkled, my face still composed, though my soul trembled with everything that had just unraveled. I hadn't noticed the woman in the dark burgundy coat until a voice called my name, soft but firm. Iris Harrison. I turned, startled, to see a figure I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. Sylvia Renner stood tall, composed, her silver-gray bob neatly in place, her black gloves still held in one hand, as if she'd just arrived from an art auction. She did not wear the awkward smile of a social guest, but the direct, appraising gaze of someone who had seen something they didn't expect. "Sylvia," I said, barely masking my surprise. "I didn't know you were here." "I wasn't invited," Sylvia replied with a wry smile. "But someone close to me was." Word travels fast in art circles, especially when chaos is dressed in silk and scandal. I wasn't sure what to say. The last time we had spoken, Sylvia had delivered a rejection with her signature grace. "Your technical skills are sharp," she'd said then, "but I don't feel the soul in your work. I need rawness, something that dares to hurt." It had stung, even though I had nodded respectfully and thanked her. Now, Sylvia looked around the disheveled ballroom. "I saw the video," she said without preamble. I stood in the back, watched the whole thing. I lowered my eyes. That wasn't supposed to be art. Sylvia's voice was quiet, but carried the kind of certainty that made people stop walking. It was, whether you meant it or not. It was art. Raw, painful, the kind of truth you can't curate. You didn't just expose their lies. You exposed yourself, your pain, your strength. That takes more than talent. It takes conviction. I blinked, momentarily speechless. 2 years ago, I finally managed. You told me my work was too polished, too distant. I did, Sylvia said simply. And I was right. A beat of silence hung between us. "And now?" I asked, not confrontational, just open. Sylvia stepped forward. "Now I'm looking at a woman who no longer hides behind composition and technique. I saw truth on that screen, and I want to show it to the world. If you're willing, Iris." I tilted my head, unsure whether I was imagining this offer. "I want to curate a solo exhibition," Sylvia continued, her voice warm but firm. "You're first. A full collection. We'll call it Behind the Curtain, Portraits of Truth. Not just the wedding, everything. The absence in your childhood, the invisibility in your family, the reclamation of your voice." I felt my breath catch in my throat. Of all the things I had prepared myself for after that night, the backlash, the blame, the shame, this was not among them. A door had opened in the middle of the ashes. "You're serious," I said softly. Sylvia met my eyes. "I don't waste time chasing flukes. What you showed today wasn't a moment. It was a culmination, and it deserves a stage." For a moment, I didn't answer. My eyes drifted to the far end of the room where my father still sat alone, head bowed. The room no longer held me, not as a place of rejection, nor as a memory of pain. Now it was simply a space I had passed through on my way to something more. I turned back to Sylvia. "When do we begin?" I asked. Sylvia smiled. "We already have." The early morning light of Brooklyn carried a different kind of clarity than Boston's cold grandeur. Here, the sun filtered through the windows of my modest new studio, warming the exposed brick walls and casting gentle patterns across the polished wood floor. I had signed the lease only a week after returning from the wedding, moved by an urgency to start again, not just in geography, but in spirit. The space was small, but it was profoundly mine. A corner was set up with backdrops and lighting, my cameras arranged with methodical care. A second-hand coffee machine hissed, filling the room with the earthy scent I had always associated with quiet focus. On the wall opposite the entrance, I hung 3 photographs, portraits taken in moments no one thought I was watching. One showed a child with mud-streaked cheeks laughing in a Bronx park. Another, an elderly woman on a bench, hands folded in prayer. And the last, unfinished yet, was a close-up of my own reflection, shadowed by the sunlight cutting through my window. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. At first, the phone barely rang. Walk-ins were rare. Those who did inquire often paused awkwardly, eyes flickering with recognition as if trying to place me. Some whispered. One client, after an initial booking, canceled with a vague message. Some things came up. I didn't need to ask. I knew the story had spread farther than I imagined. Not the art, at least not yet. But the scandal, the viral headline, Woman Exposes Cheating Sister at Wedding in Front of 200 Guests. News blogs had latched onto it. Social media platforms flooded with opinions. Some applauded my bravery, others called me vindictive. There was even a podcast episode titled Family Secrets and Public Screens, The Iris Harrison Incident. It was surreal and not always flattering, but I had made peace with that. Sylvia checked in weekly, encouraging me to focus on the upcoming exhibition. Let the noise settle, she'd say. It always does, and then your work will speak. And it did. The first break came when an editor from Art Perspective Quarterly reached out for an interview. Not about the wedding, but about my series of photos titled Unseen. I hesitated, wondering if it was just another angle to sensationalize my story. But the editor surprised me. What interests me, he said, is the empathy in your lens. It's not just what you show, it's what you reveal by not looking away. Shortly after the article published, a quiet shift began. A retired jazz musician called to ask for a portrait. Then, a mother of 3 from Queens booked a session for her family's first photograph in 10 years. A small but respected art blog listed Iris Harrison as one to watch in 2020, noting her documentary and honesty without the coldness of objectivity. My calendar began to fill, not rapidly, but steadily. And more importantly, the people who came wanted to be seen by me, not just photographed. They came because they had heard that Iris didn't edit away the wrinkles or stage perfection. She captured moments, truths, the kind that stayed long after the shutter clicked. One evening, as I reviewed raw files from a shoot, my phone buzzed with a message from Sylvia. Final gallery specs approved. Opening date set. Ready to show them? I smiled. I glanced again at the photo of myself on the wall, half-shadowed, half-lit. Then I turned back to my work, my fingers steady on the keyboard. I wasn't hiding anymore. The new chapter hadn't arrived with a parade or an apology. It had crept in, quiet and certain, like light through an open window, and it felt like home. In the days following the wedding, the Whitmore name became something of a cautionary tale in the upper circles of Boston society. What had once been whispered admiration turned swiftly into loud disapproval, and Evelyn Whitmore, once the queen of chamber music luncheons and art fundraiser galas, found herself without a single invitation. It began with a cold silence, calls she had grown accustomed to, weekly updates from event organizers, casual brunch confirmations, simply ceased. Then came the pointed removals. Her name was discreetly erased from the board of the Women's Heritage Society. A polite but firm letter arrived, expressing that in light of recent family matters, the board had voted unanimously for her resignation. The Boston Evening Register printed a subdued but damning piece about the implosion of a once-admired socialite dynasty. Her longtime friend and social confidant, Helena Montgomery, refused to return any of her messages. Even her hairdresser canceled their standing Thursday appointments. She had always taught her daughters that appearances were everything. But no tailored dress or polished accent could shield her now. The video was everywhere. Not just the betrayal, but the gleeful cruelty caught in Evelyn's voice, speaking about Iris as if she were a stain on fine linen. It wasn't just scandal. It was evidence of character, and society was quick to turn away. Meanwhile, Reginald Whitmore faced the kind of blow that bruised more than ego. It cracked foundations. 3 major real estate development contracts were suddenly withdrawn. One from a long-time investor based in Connecticut cited uncertainty in leadership values. Another, a resort firm in Cape Cod, pulled out during final negotiations, stating a need to protect its brand. He tried to control the fallout, but the whispers followed every meeting. Isn't he the father? Wasn't that his daughter? What made it worse was the silence from his own household. Evelyn barely spoke, lost in her own storm of embarrassment and disbelief. And Delaney. Delaney had disappeared from the house entirely. When she finally called him, her voice was hollow. "I need help," she said, and he barely recognized her. Delaney had always been the golden one, the pride of the family, the beautiful face of their ambition. But her fall was sharper than either of her parents anticipated. Jasper had not only ended the engagement publicly, but refused to answer any further calls. His mother, Sylvia Langston, issued a swift and scathing press statement, clarifying that the Langston family had no ongoing or future affiliations with the Whitmores. The jewelry firm that sponsored Delaney's last campaign dropped her overnight. Modeling agencies ghosted her. Her agent refused to return calls. She still had her condo, still had her wardrobe, still had her high heels, until she checked her private savings account, the one she had created with Cole, the one that was supposed to hold enough to start over in case things with Jasper went south. The balance was zero. She blinked in disbelief and tried to log in again. Still zero. When she called Cole's number, it went straight to voicemail. The last message she received from him just a few weeks earlier had said, "Relax, beautiful. After the wedding will be set." Now his social media had vanished. His apartment was empty. No mutual friends had heard from him. In a quiet, sterile moment inside her empty condo, she sat on the floor, shoes still on, and stared at the phone in her hand. Her mascara had long since smudged, her breath shallow, her thoughts darting towards something she had never dared imagine. She had been played. She had played everyone, her fiancé, her family, even Iris. But in the end, the one person she thought she could control had turned out to be playing her all along. She didn't cry, not at first. But as the hours wore on and her messages to Cole remained unread, the shock twisted into something darker. Her empire built on manipulation and beauty had crumbled in a single weekend, and there was no one left to help her pick up the pieces. Back in Boston, Evelyn stood at her kitchen window, stirring a cup of tea she wouldn't drink. Her reflection in the glass looked older, smaller somehow. She had once ruled over charity auctions and tea parties. But now the silence in the room was heavier than any social defeat. She had no gallery opening to attend, no press luncheon to host, no daughter to boast about. All she had was a story playing over and over in the minds of every person who had once admired her, a story she couldn't rewrite, and a truth she couldn't silence. The Whitmore name had not just fallen, it had imploded. One rainy afternoon in Brooklyn, a soft tap came at my studio door. When I opened it, Delaney stood there, drenched, her designer coat clinging to her, heavy with rain. "I came," she said, her voice raw from either crying or the cold. "I didn't know where else to go." I held the door, but didn't widen it. "Why no?" I asked, my voice steady. Her lip trembled. "Because I have nothing left to lie for." The sentence hung in the air, fragile and final. I studied her face. The makeup was minimal smeared. The eyes weren't pleading the way they used to when she wanted something. They were tired, stripped. "I'm not asking for anything," Delaney added quickly. I need to work. I need something real. I can clean. I can run errands. You don't even have to look at me." I stepped back from the door just enough. "You clean. You don't talk. You start from zero." Delaney nodded, as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. "I understand." I turned and walked back inside, leaving the door ajar. She followed, shedding her coat near the door, her shoes leaving water spots. She looked around the studio, eyes passing over the prints, the lights, the order I had created. She didn't touch anything. I handed her a mop. "Start there." Delaney took it without question and began in the far corner. She didn't ask about pay. She didn't ask for a towel. She moved quietly, head down, water pooling near her feet as she worked. I returned to my desk, picked up my editing tablet, and resumed reviewing images. Outside, the rain softened into a drizzle, but the air in the studio remained still and thick with something unsaid. Forgiveness had not arrived. Not yet, perhaps not ever. But consequences had, and with them, the first faint shadow of change. My gallery opening for Portraits of Truth buzzed with soft conversation, a success beyond anyone's expectations. Sylvia Renner found me, her smile genuine. "You've started something, Iris. Something honest, raw, needed." Later, Jasper Langston approached me, his suit simpler than on his almost wedding day. "I didn't expect you," I said. "I know," he offered a small smile. "But I needed to say something. You saved me without knowing it." I don't think I ever truly loved Delaney. I think I loved the idea of her, of who I was supposed to be with. Watching your video, seeing the truth, it felt like being dragged out of a dream, and I woke up a freer man. He didn't linger. "Your work is powerful, Iris. I hope you never stop." As the evening waned, I stepped near the glass entrance to breathe. The city glowed beyond. That was when I saw her. Evelyn stood beneath the awning across the street. No umbrella, no entourage. Her posture still proud, chin lifted slightly, but her expression unreadable. She didn't wave, didn't approach, just watched. We stood like that for a long minute. Two women connected by blood, divided by everything else. The mother who never praised and the daughter who no longer waited. I didn't call out. I simply reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the camera I always carried. With practiced hands, I adjusted the focus, capturing the image of Evelyn from behind glass and rain, framed by silence and the distance we had both chosen. Later, when I uploaded the image, I gave it no title at first, just a timestamp. But before printing, I added a small caption at the bottom corner. "Sometimes silence says enough. What you just witnessed wasn't revenge. It was liberation." Because maybe someone watching this has eaten the same dry bread. Maybe you've been pushed to the side, told to smile and stay quiet. Maybe you've wondered if speaking up is even worth it. It is. The silence that followed my video wasn't just shock. It was the sound of truth echoing in a room that never expected it. And that's why this story matters. If you made it to this point, then maybe like Iris, you believe that silence can be powerful, that truth doesn't need permission, and that sometimes the deepest betrayals can become the clearest mirrors. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the black sheep in your own family? What did you do when you decided to stop being quiet? Tell me your story in the comments below. I really want to know.